Good morning and welcome to today's Top Business Tech webinar on how the digital nomad generation influences business behaviour. For so many of us, we can still recall a time in life where technology was not so heavily interlaced into our everyday. But while many of us can still remember the days of dial-up connection, floppy disks and flip phones, a generation of digital nomads has been rising, a generation who has spent infancy with smartphones in their hands. As we pair digital fluency of Generation Z and its subsequent generations with the acceleration of digital transformation across all sectors in response to the coronavirus pandemic, it is no surprise that the standard of the working model has given way to remote and hybrid work. While the benefits are considerable, a new set of security concerns has been added to the plate of technology decision makers who must contend with cloud security threats, the lack of firewalls and blacklisted IP addresses, and bring your own device considerations. With all this in mind, I would now like to welcome my panel of experts to today's conversation. I would just like to start by saying that I'm afraid that Connor Blakely will not be able to join us today, but I am excited to introduce our other three panelists. First up, we have Julia Robson, who is a professional gamer and founder and CEO of DNMX Esports, brand ambassador at Acer Africa and Predator Gaming. Julia Robson is also known as Bish in her local gaming community. Previously a dentistry student, Julia decided to take the leap into becoming a full-time streamer and professional gamer in 2016. She now owns her own esports organization, named DNMX Esports, featuring partnerships with major brands like Predator Gaming and Adidas. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you.
We are also joined by Dr. Paul Redmond, who is the Director of Student Experience and Enhancement at the University of Liverpool. Paul is one of the UK's leading experts on employment markets, the impact of artificial intelligence, and the changing world of work. He has presented at hundreds of conferences and events around the world. And in addition to writing regularly for the national newspapers and other publications, he is a frequent guest on both radio and TV, appearing on numerous BBC and independent news and current affair programmes. As the Director of Student Experience and Enhancement at the University of Liverpool, Paul has held visiting lectureships at various other leading universities. Paul's research into Generation Y, aka millennials, and their helicopter parents has garnered him praise and respect from a range of national and international organisations, for which he provides consultancy on how to manage, motivate, and engage with today's 5 working generations. Last but not least, we have Josephine Hanson, who is the Managing Director of Insight at YouthSight. Josephine heads up the Insight side of YouthSight, namely the brand and higher education market for research teams. She joined YouthSight in 2013 and immediately hit the ground running, winning over clients such as Sky, Channel 4, Sports England, Ofcom, and Ensley. In 2014 and 2015, Josephine launched the State of Youth Nation, a subscription-based tracking study providing clients with access to the most up-to-date youth trends and data. Josephine began her market research career in 2001. Her 5 years were in social research, managing evaluation products for clients such as the Home Office, DECC, DCLG, Ofsted, and BIS. In 2006, she joined GfK and started providing market research to clients including BMW, Google, Facebook, BT, and the BBC. Welcome, Josephine.
Very much.
Now, let's get to the good stuff. So, first up, Paul, how do you think companies need to transform in order to retain Generation Z and digital nomad employees?
Well, it's a great question. Generation Z are transforming the world of work. And, in many respects, the things that we predicted would happen have been turbocharged by the pandemic. So the fact that we've got colleagues here from South Africa, from the south of England, from the north of England, just shows how quickly we've adapted. So it's becoming a Gen Z world very, very quickly now, and I think this generation will transform organizations very quickly. They are, as you said, digital nomads. For them, computers are not technology, they're just stuff. If it's been around before you're born, it's not technology, it's just always here. It's technology for my generation. I'm a digital immigrant in many respects. I've had to teach myself the language of computers. I mean, for the example I always use, I still say mobile phone, for instance, whereas my students say, why do you keep saying mobile phone? You know, phones have always been mobile, for goodness sake. So in a sense, you know, we've got digital immigrants, digital nomads, digital natives. You have different names for them, but I think there's certain things that the Generation Z will do in the world of work. I mean, they're very good at challenging, and I think that's the thing. So they haven't got the same authoritarian, hierarchical approaches to work that perhaps my generation had. So they're very good at challenging. They're also very good at thinking about the world of work as a cause, something that you've got to believe passionately in. You know, that's something that is really important for them. Work is an identity rather than a paycheck. So they're looking for development. They're looking for opportunity to express themselves, something that they believe in. It's a cause, and they're looking for it fairly quickly. So they're not going to wait for 10, 15, 20 years before they get keys to the corporate bathroom. They expect it fairly quickly, and if they don't get it, then they will leave. They will move on, and they'll do their own thing and move on. And so I think they've turbocharged the future, and they've brought great changes, great opportunities to organizations, but they are very different, and they will challenge organizations in ways which previous generation didn't do.
And how do you think that organizations can meet this challenge head on?
Well, first thing, when I work with lots of CEOs, the first thing I say is you've got to listen. And that's really difficult. It sounds obvious, but it's really difficult, because what I've found from any case studies that I've done, the more senior you become in your career, the more high up you go in an organization, the harder it is to listen. And that's partly because everyone expects you to be the one with the answer. You expect you to be the one with the answer. Everyone listens for you to make some sort of papal pronouncement. And what I've said to CEOs is you've got to do several things. Make sure you're always the last one to speak. And that's always useful. And get yourself a reverse mentor. Get yourself a mentor who's at least 2 generations younger than yourself, if possible. You know, and listen. So I think that's the key thing. Organizations also have to challenge themselves about multi-generational policies. So only 8% of firms at the moment have a multi-generational policy. So we're great at having policies around, you know, equality, diversity, and inclusion, but very rarely do we include generational policies. So I think we've got to really help organizations think about how we're going to approach a multi-generational world of work, because crucially, if you're going to engage with all different generations, you need staff who are from all different generations as well. And I think that's one of the things. So one thing I say to firms is, you know, your customers will never be any happier than your employees. So make sure that you engage them in different ways. But I think that's one of the challenges, really, thinking about a multi-generational organization and what does that mean.
Excellent. That's some very sound wisdom for the C-suite. And Josephine, just bringing you into this conversation, how do you think that organizations can also show that they are pro-nomadic working? And do you think that for these employees, there is anything that's non-negotiable?
Oh, that's interesting. I think I completely agree with Paul in terms of the intergenerational or the different generation policy making. In the work we do at YouthSite, we see there's quite a lot of tension at the moment between generations. Most notably, I guess, at the beginning of the pandemic between boomers and Gen Z. I think we all saw that on the internet. But since then, there's been sort of growing tension between millennials and Gen Z as well, if you just look at TikTok. And I guess it's about understanding that millennials and Gen Z are not the same, despite them both being quite young in age comparatively to the older generations that might be in your organization, and recognizing that those traditional milestones that people might be going through as they transition through being a young adult to an adult, that they're coming later in life, and those milestones have been put back quite a lot since the pandemic as well. Looking at our latest data, we saw the pandemic meant 75% of 16 to 24s were living with their parents. That's a huge number of young people who are going back home. And yet, if you look at another set of our data, moving out of the parental home is a big milestone in terms of feeling like an adult and being independent. So I guess Gen Z have really been hit by the pandemic and recognizing those adult milestones later, which often workplace policies speak to. As Paul said, there are great policies for diversity inclusion, for parenting, for even things like health insurance and pensions. Lots of these things don't necessarily kick in as being particularly important when you're young and starting out. And it is this kind of flexibility that young people are really familiar with, and especially the next generation who are going to come out having had a lot of their time learning at home or learning through their screen because they can't go to lectures at university. They'll be so flexible in the way that they learn and the way they work, that they're going to want that in the workplace as well. But I guess if you think about how employers might want to attract these young people, I think young people, and they don't want table tennis tables. They don't want necessarily gimmicks and free things. I think they want to feel that what they're doing is meaningful to them and their future, or at least that it's something that they believe in. And I guess looking at our data, the most important thing that young people are looking for from an employer at the moment, and it has been consistent over the last 5 years, is a good working environment, which is the whole point of this conversation. But what's interesting is that we've seen, although it is the standout number one priority for young people, that has increased in importance over the last couple of years. So, number two is being successful. Number three is being ethical as a company. So you can see that things are changing, and the good working environment can be interpreted in lots of different ways. I think 5 years ago that would have been the office environment, but now we need to really reflect on what that does mean for young people thinking about starting out in their career and how they can connect with their colleagues, but also do well. And as Paul said, Gen Z really want to understand their progression, and they want to get there fast if that's possible. So they're all the things, I guess, you need to think about if you're going to be attracting Gen Z going forward.
Thank you, Josephine. And before we come on to talking a little bit more about the cybersecurity considerations, Julia, I just wanted to add one extra question in. As CEO of DNMK Esports, I was wondering, as you're much more of a technology-based company, how have you met these needs as an organization, and how have you attracted younger talent?
That's an interesting one, actually, because we're not really technology focused, which is the irony. What we have in common, all of us, are that we are gamers. And that, sounds very funny, I guess, to some people, but it is an identity. It's like saying, we are really passionate about this specific industry that also includes various different means of technology, whether that be mobile, console, PC. So what Paul alluded to, saying that, everything's technology for us at the moment because, everything is just stuff. So for us, it really is more focused on the culture. So ironically, we're way more in tune with who you are as a person. You know, what are your passions? What do you strive towards? And when I initially have conversations with people who are really interested in joining DNMK, I always ask the question, what is your passion? Because it gives that person the opportunity to express, you know, what exactly is their niche and what exactly did they, in their personal experience of being a video gamer, make them passionate in the first place, and how can we enable them to be able to feel like they're making a difference and assist them with making a difference in the communities or niches that they are possibly focused in, something that I might have never been exposed to. So it's really understanding, you know, the culture, the subculture, and also just, you know, I guess the social aspects of it and how you can benefit from putting your business within these niches and making sure that you're contributing to the growth of those platforms. Because again, for us, you know, being a video gamer might not seem so you know, new age anymore, but being a cosplayer that streams on Twitch and, you know, speaks to a specific niche culture, that's something that someone else would personally feel a lot more passionate about. So it really is just, you know, having that open discussion and making sure that you're conveying your business's passions and focuses from the get-go. And that you express that outwardly. Again, social media being one of these technology, you know, progressions in the world, we really use social media and content creation and different media platforms as a tool to express those passions and make sure that we speak to those niche cultures and we serve them in a way. And that's sort of how we go about, I guess, our HR department in that way. So yeah, it definitely has changed a lot since I am myself a millennial. You know, I speak to Gen Z all the time. In fact, that's kind of where we're focused now. Even millennials is kind of not really where you want to be situated. You want to look at even younger, because you know, our business is still growing. We were only established in May of 2020. And prior to that, for the last 6 years of me being a Twitch streamer, video gaming has changed so much in 6 years. So I need to look at, you know, how does the technology grow, but how does the social community values within the communities, within the niches grow, and what are their focuses and how can we assist?
That's great. So the key thing I'm getting from the three of you, in addition to the flexibility of technology, is that the workplace has to be culturally inviting, and for both Gen Z and millennials, they need to feel like they are making a difference in their work and the work that they do. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I think not only making a difference, but also feeling, you know, that what Josephine mentioned about success and, you know, hitting those milestones, it does happen a lot quicker, and milestones can also be interpreted differently. So she mentioned traditional milestones within, you know, getting married, having kids, you know, being financially stable. And I think at the back of their minds, a certain group of people still appeal to that. But for example, myself and a few other people that I know, those milestones don't really matter to me. For me, the focus is more, how do I feel fulfilled in my day to day? And because I'm spending so much time doing this, like what does this mean for me? I don't just want to make enough money to feed myself and my family. I want to do more than that. I want to have an impact. I want to feel that I'm doing something that's for the greater good or that impacts the community. And I can give you a very niche example, would be my Counter-Strike Global Offensive team, which is one game out of millions in the world. But this specific game is quite popular across the world. I've traveled overseas to attend many of these events, and every single time I've gone to these events, the main focus is what can I soak up to take back to my country and offer the people that are so passionate about this one game the opportunity that I had to go overseas and visit, you know, IEM Katowice in Poland, which is just the biggest, baddest, craziest gaming festival in the world. How can I give them a piece of that in South Africa? And that's where, you know, the start of DNMK starts. We want to curate local talents, and we want to make sure that they get to compete in the international scene. And that they get to have that experiences. So that's for me a personal passion, something that I focus on. So again, it really does come back to, you know, making that difference and, you know, being ethical and focusing on your community, but also making sure that you're assisting other people do that.
Just to follow on from that, Julia, I guess we have data that completely backs up your point. You know, 79%, so nearly 8 out of 10 Gen Z say that they want to be surrounded by people of different cultures, different ideas, that would really kind of give them that sense of diversity, variety. They don't want, I guess, growing up with the internet, growing up, I'm gonna say like my mobile phone, you know, growing up with all this technology, young people have never been able to connect as much as they are now. Previous generations, I imagine probably myself and Paul here, you know, we were growing up and our friends probably lived around the corner from us and they attended our school, but there weren't many other young people or other people in our lives really, apart from, you know, the people immediately around us. And young people are growing up today with unlimited access to people, connections, lifestyles, cultures that just weren't around before. And I think that that's something that's really important when you're thinking about the workplace, because I think a lot of particularly sort of large employers often recruit the same kind of person to do that kind of work. And thinking about what Gen Z are wanting from the workplace, that's that they're wanting different experiences while at work as well. They don't want to be surrounded by Me Too's kind of thing. And so it's really worth thinking about how you can diversify your recruitment pool while at the same time offering that flexibility.
So of course, as Josephine, as you've just said, we so many of us can remember having a landline to call our friends, or everything just being within walking distance. And we are now at a point in our lives when our fridges have more tech than a computer probably did in the 80s. And of course, with that comes a lot of cybersecurity concerns. I mean, was there ever a time where you would worry that someone would hack your fridge? It sounds very Y2K, but of course now it is very much a reality. And with that acceleration of technology, and Julia, I'd like to put this question to you, but of course open it out to you, Josephine and Paul. Do you feel that the younger generations are much more aware of cybersecurity concerns as opposed to the older generations?
Absolutely. I think it's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. We're allowing so many people to explore and to edit and develop and, you know, remove, retract, add, that you can't really keep up. And, you know, if I look at my brother, for example, he's 4 years younger than me, and he is the person that got me into video gaming. And ironically now, he completely flipped, you know, 180 to me, where I was studying and dropped out to be a gamer. He decided to stop being a gamer and to start studying. So he is now a physics student, and he's doing his honors and, you know, smart behind his ears, to the point where he's developing programs that's offering solutions to the local gaming industry without really noticing how big of an impact that makes. For him, it's just logic. And then, you know, offering that type of genius, you know, or I said genius, I mean, it's my brother, but, you know, I'm sure a lot of people have the skills to be able to adapt that and to be able to go and then, you know, give someone a piece of hardware to be able to develop and do research and so on. You will get people that are naturally curious to see what happens if you add a little bit of chaos instead of good. And I think that happens, you know, more frequently than not. And we see that within the gaming realm a lot, even just looking at hackers, people that download scripts that, in our terms, break the game. And then you play versus them and you're having a horrible time because there's no way you can beat someone that's hacking. And the only solution that we have is to report them and continue playing that match, because there's nothing else that you can do. you know, it's a completely anonymous person. You know that they could possibly live down the street from you, but there's no way of you knowing that. And unfortunately, that's just one of the options. You know, it goes a lot further into people doing phishing and, you know, scams for in-game cosmetic items, which actually cost a lot of money in real life too. And now we're adding, you know, things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and all of that come into gaming as well within that realm. So you really do open up a really large door, and specifically to people that might just get into video gaming as an entry person that doesn't know better, to not click on links that's being sent to you, or to not follow websites that aren't legit. They wouldn't know. And then, you know, being burnt that way. So you really have to educate, you know, specifically people that start into video gaming initially, or my preferred way of going about it, just based off of my own experience, is for people that have, you know, younger siblings, or that's a parent that's willing to listen and willing to do some research. Just giving them some sort of top tips on cybersecurity that will already just eliminate like the 80% risk, like the easy phishing scams, the easy hacks, the easy cybersecurity breaches, and make sure that you're aware of that. But the one thing that I would say that probably I think affected me the most was noticing as a millennial how often my cell phone knew exactly what was happening in my life. And it's something that opened my eyes to it, because I started questioning, you know, I understand technology, I'm a professional video gamer, I should know what I'm doing, you know, ultimately. And you just realize that there's always someone that's one step ahead of you. So you kind of need to turn off your notifications. You need to make sure that you step out of the technology realm. You need to make sure that you have these conversations with people like we are having now, and learning and, you know, educating yourself. And I think that's sometimes hard for people, specifically my generation and younger, to understand, because you're like, well, all the answers are on Google, so why wouldn't I just use the tools that I have? But also just stepping out of that and understanding that you need to sort of go back and take yourself out of the virtual world and protect yourself, because you can easily click on a link that just takes you down a rabbit hole and there's no way out for you. So yeah, I think I'm specifically quite pedantic about it, but yeah, I think it's also worthwhile for everybody that, you know, is listening, to take notice of, you know, what do you have your notifications turned on to? Where is your location tracking? What links are you clicking on? Do you think twice? Are you questioning your passwords? Are you resetting them? You know, those types of things. And also, who can you help? Like, who are the people in your immediate circle that you can be like, hey, have you changed your passwords in the last few months? Like, I think you should maybe do that. Or, you know, giving them some context and some indication to just probe them to do that.
I think that is really excellent advice that I think people of all ages can take on board. But one of the things I'm definitely taking from what you're saying is that younger generations are bringing a lot of additional skills to the workplace that aren't quite the type that would necessarily go on a CV, and that's just basic cybersecurity awareness that, as Paul phrased it, digital immigrants might not have quite as much understanding of. So that can bring a vast amount of value to a business, particularly in educating. So I think that's a really nice thing to acknowledge that I don't think is spoken about quite enough. Instead, I think when it comes to the evolution of technology, the concern is always the same, isn't it? And it's, will we lose our jobs? Is AI going to take away our jobs? What does the future hold? And Paul, I was just wondering, could I please get your input on this? Where do you think, how does AI position job prospects for the future?
I think it's going to absolutely revolutionize the world of work in ways that I think we're only just beginning to understand, and also to become worried about. I mean, we were talking about different generations, but one thing that I think Generation Z don't have that my generation did have was the luxury of anonymity. You know, so I think people have lost their anonymity sometimes before they're born. You know, their parents have scans on Facebook, for goodness sake. So they've never had the luxury of anonymity. And And that's, I think we're only now beginning to realize how important that is. You know, for me, I could go to different job interviews and reinvent my career backstory every interview. You know, I hope no one's listening to this actually, who's interviewed me, but yeah, I could do that. But now everything is online. So, you know, and I think that's a danger, I think, because it's today people are having to constantly be their own PR agency. They're having to project their own image of themselves constantly. It's something that you can't opt out of. And I think that becomes exhausting in ways which, again, we're just beginning to think it's like an actor who can't get out of the role. You're constantly on stage. And there's no surprise that even though people have more contacts than ever before, levels of loneliness, levels of isolation, anxiety have never been higher. And I think it's because the flip side of this AI cyber world is a huge sense of loneliness and what does it all mean, you know? So I think AI will transform the world in ways that, again, I think we're just beginning to understand. So the fact that we're all of us here today on the screen, they're images of ourselves, but they needn't be images of ourselves. I could have an image of Tom Cruise of myself if I wanted, or a cat. You know, the sense that I could have a different voice, I could be in a different place, I don't need to be here. That sense of what's real and what's fake or what's deep fake is something that I think is going to become a real worry for people. And I think paradoxically what it will do is it will raise the value of here and now events and situations. People just will be, you know, the chance to be in a room with someone would be so freaky. People will pay a premium for it. So I think that it has lots of opportunities, lots of challenges, but it also has lots of risks as well. I mean, one thing that I talk to our students about is CPA, the threat of continuous partial attention. I think one thing that there'll be people listening to our podcast, our webinar now. They'll have numerous screens on. They'll have a TV screen. They'll have their phone that they're looking at. People no longer really engage deeply in things as perhaps they would have once done. And I think that risk of the danger of these weapons of mass distraction that we're all surrounded by means that we don't concentrate. We're losing the ability to concentrate perhaps that we used to do. So I think that there's great opportunities with AI, but I mean, particularly in education, you know, I did a holographic talk not long ago when I appeared as a hologram, like the ghost of Jacob Marley. I can't say it was any better than my normal lectures when I'm stood behind a lectern, but anyway, you know, it was how it was. But again, I think it also raises questions about what is it that we really value, you know, what really matters.
If I could just come in on that point as well, I guess at YouthSite, we're also concerned about the impact of AI on entry-level jobs for young people. Because of course, AI will just continuously learning without error, and therefore will quite quickly. I think there was a conference of AI experts saying sort of like entry-level jobs will be gone by 2030 or something quite scary like that. And if you're thinking about, you know, you've got AI technology coming, you've got changes within the workplace. We've found that during the pandemic, young people just didn't know what the world of work was. In 2017, 60% of young people said that they understood what the world of work was going to be like for them when they got there. That halved. Only 38% said that they knew what the world of work was going to be like for them. And that's just the pandemic effect. Then you've got AI effect taking away these entry-level jobs. And then there's the sort of move to greater flexibility, as well as maybe less connection. It does really make you wonder what the future is for young people coming into the workplace, and how can we ensure that they have meaningful work, because of course a lot of young people who are doing, you know, this panel is about digital nomads, a lot of young people who are sort of working remotely and all over the world, many of them are taking on quite insecure work, the gig economy. They're doing sort of remote working using sites like Fiverr or justremote.co. And so that's great for a certain length of time, but it's not how other generations have benefited from working, and young people are missing out on things like sick pay or contributions to pensions. Whether or not young people will ever benefit from pensions is another talk, I guess. But what we do see is that young people who do sort of do this remote kind of working, they have ridiculously high job satisfaction. 90% say that they're satisfied with their job. 76% say that they're satisfied with their salary. Honestly, if everybody at YouthSite was saying that about working for us, not that it's a terrible place to work at all, it's unbelievably high satisfaction with some of those things. It makes you realize that being a digital nomad is really fulfilling and ticking other boxes that the traditional way of working that we've all done, commuting, the Northern Line, getting into a big office block and sitting in a kind of cubicle, that's quite limiting in terms of life experience. And I think Gen Z, especially given the pandemic, are keen to not have that limited experience anymore. Amber, you're on mute.
I'm on mute, terribly sorry. So would you say that overall younger generations are all showing a preference for remote working and remote traveling and working with that?
I think it's difficult because I think pre-pandemic we spoke about Gen Z being generation sensible. Mm-hmm. They were very keen on making sure that they work hard. They believed that if they work hard, they'd get what they deserved. Mm-hmm. And our data has shown that has really changed over the pandemic. Our data is saying that if I get a good education, I can get the job that I want. That has significantly fallen since the pandemic, and I think that young people are just questioning how they do get ahead now. And the value of education as well. So of course, it's not going to be all of a generation who are interested in this, but I think that as the majority of that generation are interested in having a life that has more experiences than maybe they've been sort of allowed to have. We ask a question, would you prefer to be given a gift, like a present, or an experience? And 70% of Gen Z say that they want an experience over a gift. They don't want stuff. It's not about stuff for them. It's about their life and creating those memories and things that they enjoy, rather than hoarding possessions. So that's probably a really important thing to think about when you're thinking about your HR policy, your recruitment policy. How can you create those experiences through the workplace rather than making the workplace facilitate experiences outside of work? Yeah.
I mean, building on that, one thing I found talking to my own staff, that my Generation Z colleagues, many of whom were recruited during the lockdown, they've really missed out on being able to come into the office. They've really missed out on being able to work with managers, to impress managers, actually. They've really felt isolated. And of course, it's one thing for boomers and Generation X to sit in their houses and their own rooms while Zooming. But if you're in a shared house, you sat on the end of a bed, that's no way to work. And I think there is a growing sense of panic amongst some Gen Z that, oh God, is this it? Is this it? So they want to get involved in coming out and going to places that other generations haven't been able to do.
And just as we finally wrap up, Julia, do you have any final comments on how we can best make Gen Z happy in the workplace?
Yeah, I think just listening to Josephine and Paul, like there's so many great key points to come from this. And I think just even looking at, you know, what is important, not only just to Gen Z millennials, but to everyone. I think this pandemic has obviously opened a lot of people's eyes. And just looking at the movements that's coming out of these moments of being on social media and being connected and understanding, you know, world issues, ethical issues, you know, issues within the workplace, and this small things that I think a lot of people can connect on and relate to and work on towards for the greater good, and that already you know, put such a positive spin on, you know, something that has shook a lot of people's worlds. But I think something that, you know, I can definitely relate to is those experiences. And what Paul mentioned is that, you know, how people, if I can say, you know, they crave that affirmation, they crave those experiences, and it's eventually it feels like it's going to become so foreign. You know, there's two ways that you can look at, you know, the extremes. Ultimately, with remote work, I think this is really an opportunity for us to look at establishing, you know, smaller cities with infrastructure that younger generations can move to and experience, you know, remote work, but have the pleasure of experience a smaller city that offers everything. And I think that types of infrastructure really needs to be considered by people, you know, that are in charge of those smaller towns. Like, you know, it diversifies the area so much. I'm just looking at how many people are moving from Johannesburg in South Africa to Cape Town, and me being one of them. Even though Johannesburg is my region, I'd prefer to jump on a flight and go there and see the ocean every day because I'm working from home, than, you know, having to live in Johannesburg where it's really just city life and you can't make use of anything that is available there. So really sort of reinventing spaces and, you know, making it a more of an experience. I know a lot of people, and I guess as a millennial, I use YouTube quite a lot as to like an insight into other people in the world. You know, what are they doing with their office space? What are they doing with their employees? And I've seen specifically a lady that is based in London, ultimately, Chrissy Seller. She owns a fitness company called Tone and Sculpt, and I actually look at her like as a bit of an inspiration with that, like how she's transforming her office into rather being an engaging space, a place for them to, you know, brainstorm and interact and go to work out and, you know, interact with new products, rather than it being, you know, a cubicle space to get your work done and go home because you don't have that space at home. That's just one of the options. Like, and then the other extreme, which is people sort of disconnecting and finding it really strange to connect with people, and building that sense of community and sense of culture. I think right now is probably the best time to start brainstorming how can we bring that back, you know, in a way that, you know, fits regulations and policies and all of those things. But how can you bring back that sense of connection with people in real life? And for me, that one thing is hosting a esports LAN event, where a bunch of people bring their own computers, and it was a massive thing a few years ago, and it just died out for the last 10 years because people were like, why do I need to take my computer anywhere? Like, that doesn't make any sense. I have my gaming set up at home, everything's bolted into the walls, super high tech. But now people are actually going and saying, like, you know what, I would really enjoy interacting with gamers in real time, and, you know, having esports as that spectacle that it once were, because the numbers are actually dipping slightly with, you know, the traditional esports like Counter-Strike, like Dota, like League of Legends. There are massive user bases online, but the interaction with that is slightly limited. So how can you go and get people back and get that sense of community? And this specifically, you know, counts for more developing countries, specifically like South Africa, and, you know, spaces that aren't necessarily the hub of esports or the hub of any sort of tech or industry for that matter. You know, how can you establish smaller hubs or new hotspots in the world, and that's a different opportunity to look at too. So there are very many opportunities that are arising, and I think true to what Paul mentioned about just staying open to those opportunities and being available to move with the currents and go with how technology is flowing rather than fighting back to it. I think that's sort of how you stay in the loop.
I think that is a fantastic note to end on. Well, thank you very much, guys, for coming to speak today. It's been really insightful. I think our listeners have gained a lot of insight with the key takeaway, I think, being the need to create a better sense of culture and much more flexibility in the workplace. And I would like to thank all of our viewers today for joining us to understand how the digital nomad generation is influencing business behavior. Top Business Tech will be hosting another webinar on the 26th of October around intelligent automation and overcoming the challenges to maintain a competitive edge. You can register today on our website by visiting www.tbtech.co/events. Thank you all for listening.